Welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self, and I'll be your host today. My guest today is Skip Schweiss. Skip was someone that I've heard about for many years. He has previously been a key executive with TD Ameritrade as a managing director of advisor advocacy and industry affairs. He was very much in the middle of the push for fiduciary standard and just a lot of things that were happening around the advisory business for the last 20 years. To say the least, Skip has had a very white-collar career. But what you'll find out in this conversation is that some coming from his roots growing up and some coming from just his own desire to push himself and see what he was made of and see what he could do in the outdoors. He's gotten to a point in his life where he's been able to weave both the personal and the professional. And one of the coolest parts of his story is this group trip that he puts together every year with a friend that is called Excellent Adventures. And they pick a spot somewhere in the United States. And the group has grown and grown, and they've had as many as 60 or 70 people show up to these different locations to try one of the hikes that Skip and a friend have put together. Through it all, they come away with a tremendous amount of camaraderie, no matter what the accomplishment was. And Skip has a lot to say about that, a lot to say about why he thinks we as human beings push ourselves to extremes and do hard things that put ourselves in situations of suffering. And those are pieces that I'm always interested to hear other experiences. And I think Skip does a fantastic job and has some great stories to tell about the adventures in his own life. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Skip Schweiss. All right, Skip Schweiss, welcome to the On Adventure podcast. You and I have kind of overlapped circles for several years and with friends and connections, and I'm really excited that the times worked out for us to sit down, especially on the tail end of something you just finished that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit. But let me kind of tee you up a little bit. I know about you because of my time as a financial advisor associated with TD Ameritrade and your role as an executive with them for many years. So if you would just kind of introduce yourself about who you are, where you're at, and what you're doing now that TD Ameritrade doesn't exist in the form that we knew for so long.
Yeah, I was born and raised in the Midwest in a small town in South Dakota. Went to school there, met a girl, followed her to Denver. We've been married 38 years now, have 3 grown kids ourselves. My last professional role before the one I'm in right now was with TD Ameritrade. I was responsible for their trust company in Denver, where we did custody and back office services for advisors, advising small businesses on their 401k plans. And I also did public policy advocacy work for them on behalf of advisors. So I was there 12 years. Schwab comes in and buys TD. I left in 2020. And about a year later, I did take about a year off, which I highly recommend for anyone who can pull that off. But I went to work for one of our clients. We had an advisory firm that I've been doing business on the custodian side for them for 30 years and knew them well, trusted them, admired their growth curve. They were getting later in their careers and working lives and wanted to have someone come in to just run the day-to-day business and asked me to do that. And eventually I did join them in the fall of 2021. So the business is primarily located in Santa Monica, California. I still live in Denver and go back and forth. So that's what I'm doing professionally right now.
How often do you make that trip back and forth?
Most weeks.
Is it really every week?
Yeah, most weeks I come out Monday morning and go home Thursday afternoon, evening, and then work from home on Friday. There are other weeks that I'm away at a industry conference or something like that, but that's kind of the standard.
Yeah, that's I think happens more often now than maybe 5 or 10 years ago. But I'm sure it still wears on you a little bit to be traveling that much. But where do you find time to work some of these adventures that you get yourself into?
Well, I've been able to pick it up some since my kids left the nest, frankly, and I wouldn't do this commuting gig if I still had kids in the nest. But weekends and longer weekends, and occasionally, at least once a year, I'll carve out a week or two to go maybe internationally to go attempt some mountains or some long treks or something like that. So it's a priority for me.
Yeah.
It's just something I love, and I'm sure we'll get into that a lot more. But we make time for things that are priorities for us.
Fair enough. Now, when did you realize that being outside and doing hard things was an important thing? Did that come from moving to the base of the Rockies, or was that seeded a long time before that?
I think it's a combination. I think the seeds were planted as a youth. I did grow up in a small Midwestern town in South Dakota. Hunting was a way of life there. I grew up hunting. My dad was very much into that and taught his kids to shoot and hunt and respect firearms and all of that. So we were out in the field quite a bit. We would fish, we would camp, we would hike. I was a Boy Scout, did a lot of hiking and camping with the Boy Scouts. And then after I moved to Colorado as a young adult, I moved to the base of the Rocky Mountains, as you say. And, at the time I was busy just trying to establish a career. I didn't have two nickels to rub together to do any traveling to, climb mountains or do anything like that. And then I'll never forget one day I opened up the newspaper at the time, the Rocky Mountain News here in Denver. And I always read the sports section and got all those scores and all that. But on the back of the Rocky Mountain News on Sunday, they had an outdoor column. It was quite extensive. A gentleman named John Meyer, who I believe still works for the Denver Post, would write an outdoor column, and he would write it about skiing or hiking or mountaineering or various things to do in Colorado. And there was this thing, he wrote a column about scaling these 14,000 foot peaks in Colorado. And even though I had lived right at the base of them for several years by then, 3 or 4 years, I knew nothing about them. And I read this column with fascination. And I remember asking my wife and a friend, hey, is this something you'd be interested in doing? And we agreed, and we all got up and down a relatively easy 14,000 foot peak called 14ers here in Colorado. And I said, that was a blast. Let's do it again next weekend. So we did another one the next weekend. And by then it was getting into fall a little bit that year, and the weather was turning, and it's much more difficult being up high. So we set it aside for the winter. And I remember the following spring looking at my wife saying, that was so much fun. And over the winter, I had told several friends, I am so enamored with this, I'm going to do all of them. And there are 54 of these in Colorado. Mm-hmm. I can't even tell you to this day what bit me, but it bit me. And I said, this is so great, I'm going to do them all. And I remember some people laughing at me, which if you want me to accomplish something,
you just laugh at you.
Just doubt me.
Okay.
So I remember looking at my wife saying, hey, it's springtime. That was so much fun last year. I want to go do it again. And she looked at me and said, you know what? I really didn't enjoy that. You go ahead. So the friend and I went, and we, over the next 15 years, we did them all. I'm making way too long an answer out of this, but it was a combination of the seed planting as a youth. I kind of grew up in the outdoors, and then moving to the Rocky Mountains and getting the real bite around and the bug around getting up into these high places, and just the stress and strain, the looking up there and seeing the summit and saying, I'm going to do that, today, or, if it takes a day or two or a week, whatever it takes, setting that goal and working so hard to attain that goal just got into my blood and has never left.
Yeah. Did you, I mean, I can see the thread of consistency from hunting and being outside, and you probably did that as a kid in some pretty tough weather at times. And but the jumping from that to doing a 14er, I don't know. The thing that makes, in my own life, I many years ago got into doing triathlons, and the first one I did, I was scared to death, and it wasn't a really long one, but I did it, and I felt horrible at the end of it, and I did it really slow, and I couldn't wait to do the next one. Like,
Yep.
So maybe there is something similar in respect to you hitting these 14ers and just wanting to keep going. And you are fortunate to be at a place where fairly quickly you can be in some pretty high elevations, pretty remote areas and unbelievable views. And it sounds like you've taken full advantage of that. Now, have you finished all 14ers?
I did that a number of years ago. Yeah, I did
Okay.
that. Again, they're about 54. I would do roughly 4 a year for 15 years, 14 or 15 years, and I finished them in '03. Yeah, so they're
Was
done.
one
Sorry?
was one of them the most difficult compared to the other ones, or were they all pretty similar?
They're not similar. Well, there is a lot of similarity. I tell people that of the 54, 35 of them you can get up and down without using your hands. So
Hmm.
they're more treks, uphill treks, strenuous though they may be, but not really climbs. And then the other 19 or 20, you get into some climbing. I can't say there's a single one that was the hardest, although I've been asked that question many times. And the famous maroon bells outside of
Mhm.
Aspen just might, if I really had to name hardest, those could be. But some are hardest because they're deep in the backcountry and you've got to pack in, and they're long, strenuous trips, and others are more technically difficult where you're threading your way up and using your hands and narrow exposed places. So the difficulties can come in different forms.
Yeah. I've been to the base of the Maroon Bells, the lake that looks
The
up
lake,
at some of the
beautiful, beautiful place.
best pictures I've ever taken
Yeah.
from right there. Just unbelievable. And you guys your group did was it the Four Pass Loop several years ago?
Yeah.
Was that when you checked that elevation or that peak off, or had you done that at some point prior?
Yeah, I had done those prior, and Four Pass Loop actually threads between you skirt the Bells on your right and Pyramid Peak on your left, and then go
Okay.
all the way around over to Snowmass and right at the base of Snowmass Peak. So you kind of are treading at the base of four different 14ers, and
Oh, so you don't actually hit the summits
nope,
on that
not
loop.
on
Okay.
Four Pass Loop, but yeah, Scott and I, Scott McKillop, one of your prior guests, and I did Four Pass Loop. I can't even remember the year, but we decided to do that. That's a whole story in itself. But when we finished, we said this would make a great, excellent adventure, which is what Chip Rome and I hatched quite a few years ago. And we ended up going back and doing it with a large group of people. And it's still one of the I've done it 4 times, and it's maybe the hardest hike I've ever done.
Really?
It's something like 28 miles and 8,000 vertical feet. And the reason it's called Four Pass Loop is it is a loop, a circle, and it goes over four 12,000-foot passes in the Elk Range of the Rocky Mountains. And so you're all day between 9 and 12,000 feet. And the beauty is off the charts, and the difficulty is also off the charts. And I'd like to do it one more time. I have one
Oh,
more in me.
really?
My son now is in his 30s, and he does some of these with us. And it's really on his bucket list. So I said, I am absolutely up for it one more time, and we'll find a time to do that.
That's cool. Yeah, when we were there several years ago, there was actually a backpacker coming off of the loop that had hiked over the weekend, and I asked her, I said, "Have you ever done this before?" She said, "No, this is the first time I've ever been backpacking." Like,
Oh my goodness.
wow, and she survived. So
That's impressive.
yeah, but I'd love to spend time around there. I have spent different time in different places through Colorado, and it's definitely one of my favorite states in the union, and very diverse in geography, depending on where you're at. So I don't want to jump ahead because I do want to get to your trip to Telluride. Speaking of diverse geography, but you just alluded to this excellent adventure group that you put together. Why don't you describe a little bit of what that group is all about and why you started it in the first place?
Yeah, so Chip Rome runs Tiburon Strategic Advisors. I would loosely call it a financial services consulting firm, market research and consulting firm out of Tiburon, California. I worked for a firm that hired him to help us quite a few years ago, maybe close to 20 years ago, and started getting to know him. And then he runs a really great industry conference for all his clients. And I started going to that. I think for me, it's my favorite industry conference. And as we were getting to know each other, and he came to understand my love for the outdoors and mountains, he one day mentioned, I've always wanted to do Mount Whitney in California. And I said, I would like to do it too. It's the highest mountain in the lower 48 states. It's got that kind of goal element to it, and we should go do that. So we talked about it for a while and figured out you got to get permits and this and that. And we ended up inviting some friends, and we ended up with 13 people and 12 or 13 people, and we did it, and it was really hard. And afterwards we had a great dinner and just talked about our day. And I think right then and there, we said, this was such a blast. We need to do it every year. We need to do something like this every year. So now every year, Chip and I pick someplace in the United States, someplace that we can find a really hard hiking trail one day and in a really cool place. Like we just came from Telluride this week, and where we can just invite a whole bunch of people and have a great time. And it's not as much centered around a super hard hike anymore, although we that's always the centerpiece. But people can come and they can go sightseeing, or they can go fishing, or they can go for shorter hikes, or whatever they want, and just join. And we've had, from the 13 people we had at that first one, we had 40 in Telluride this week.
Oh, wow.
We've had, a couple of years ago in Glacier National Park, we had 60. Last year in Jackson Hole, we had 70. So we get dozens of people now come on these things. People are starting to bring their children, their high school, college, adult children, their spouses. It just really turned into a thing. And it's an absolute blast.
Wow.
One of the fun things we do after we finish the hike and we get cleaned up and we all go out to a group dinner, and we talk about the day and the weekend and how much fun we've had and different trail stories. And then we announce next year's trip. And Chip and I always keep that close to the vest until that moment. And that has become such a moment that on Monday, as we're recording this, just 4 days later, as we were about to announce it, I saw people's phones come up and they turning on their video to capture the moment of the announcement. So next year, we're going to Zion National Park.
Oh, that's awesome.
And hey, if you want to come,
I might take you up on that.
Yeah. So it's really turned into a great tradition. And I now have a daughter and a son who come. My wife tags along, though she doesn't do any hiking or the big hike anyways. And my daughter and my son come with me, and it's just really a treat that I look forward to all year.
That is cool. You've essentially created an adventure conference that happens to be outside.
I hadn't thought of it in that term, but that's a good one.
Well, I mean, 60 or 70 people, that's legit. You just need to start getting sponsorships and, people setting up demo tape.
Yeah, right. That might have an exhibit hall.
Yeah.
We do incur some costs to produce this, so maybe that would be a good idea.
Well, I interviewed Eric Clark last year for the podcast as well. And between him and Steve Sandusky and Scott McKillop, I've heard of these different, you didn't mention this, but one of those guys mentioned the Nepali Coast trip that you guys took, and the Maroon Bells and Glacier, and the one, where was it that you guys were where Steve broke his ankle?
Mount Shasta,
yeah. So I've heard a lot of these stories, and they've been prevalent on the podcast, but it's fun to get to talk to the origin of it all. So, and was this when you started this for the first trip? Did you say what year that was?
Gosh, I'd have to do math. We just completed our 13th, so it would have been about 2012, I think, would have been the first, Whitney.
And so if my math is right, that's about when your kids were getting into adulthood.
That is about right. My son was born in the 90s, so he was 22. He would have been just finishing college at that time. Yeah.
And so where my questioning is going, is that when you started to weave the more of adventure in your life into the kind of your, the white collar career that you've had? Was it around that time where this became more of an interweaving, or had you been doing that for years before?
Good question. Now, I had been doing all the 14ers in Colorado the years before. And the reason it took me 15 years and I did 4 a year is because I had a family and I had a demanding work life and marriage and house. And so, I would kind of spread that out. I was coaching my son's baseball team in the summer when it was also prime time to be outside. So yeah, I would sort of spread those things out. But when the kids started leaving the nest, that makes a difference. So I started, and about that time I finished the 14ers. So I started looking further afield and started going internationally as well. So did Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, did Mount Fuji with some friends in Japan. I've been to Argentina a couple times in the Andes. Went to Europe this summer in the Alps with a good friend. So yeah, it's given me the time as the kids have left the nest. It just gives you a little more space to go off on trips like that.
Yeah. And that's one of the things as a financial planner, I'm curious about how people plan these things. You said it earlier that if it's important to you, you make it a priority, but taking it from that to actually planning it in the schedule, setting aside finances, making the actual logistical plans to pull it off. It sounds like you figured that out as you went, but were there any major hurdles or roadblocks to pulling these things off?
We all schedule vacations, and this is conceptually no different than booking a vacation. You got to do the planning, you got to set, as you said, you got to set the money aside, block the time, book your flights and your lodging. And the one element on top of this is you've got to book, especially when I go internationally, it's usually bigger, more challenging peaks, and I'm typically hiring a guide or a guide service.
Yeah.
Which I've done also quite a bit in the Cascades and the Pacific Northwest. So that's one other element in addition to just any of us planning a vacation. And you might have to take a lot of different kinds of gear along as well. So yeah, it's again conceptually not different than any of us planning a vacation. There are one or two extra elements to it, but conceptually the same.
Do you recommend hiring a guide for some of the more challenging exploits?
I do. So, people ask me about climbing and they look at me as a climber, but I tell them I don't feel I'm an accomplished mountaineer. I've done quite a bit, but I'm really more of a relentless trekker. I can put one foot in front of the other about better than anybody on earth. I don't have a lot of other skills, but I have that one. But when it comes to more tricky terrain, a mountain I'm not familiar with some more technically demanding terrain, I want a professional by my side. And
Yeah.
it's no different than, in your house, you might take on certain projects yourself. And there are other projects you look at and say, it's time for a professional on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that piece that you just said a second ago about being able to put your one foot in front of the other better than anybody else, that kind of relentlessness, where does that come from? Have you always had that, or are there things that you see in your life that really developed that skill?
There might be a couple of sources of that. I remember my mom saying something to me about my dad to that effect, about him,
Really?
where she said, if you need someone to go and get into a boat and row across the Pacific Ocean, he's your guy. Like, he will not stop. And so maybe I got some of that from him.
Yeah.
And I remember being in the outdoors with him at times, and no matter you touched on weather earlier, the weather, the terrain, anything, you couldn't stop him. And so I might have gotten some of that from him. And then I learned going through life as you get into adulthood and career, and there are a lot of different kind of skills and attributes that help you in your career and in life. And one thing I found is persistence is one of those. Just relentless, don't give up. If you set a goal, don't give up. You're going to hit obstacles. It's going to be hard. You're going to get adverse weather or whatever the circumstances and the curveballs. Keep going. And so I think a combination of things throughout my life has led to that.
That's interesting. So maybe a little bit of DNA and sprinkled and watered with life experience because it is one thing to see your dad doing these things and going, I bet I could do that. But then actually having experiences through your own life where you are challenged and prove to yourself that, yeah, I actually can.
I actually
It sounds,
can. And I think I've learned on the second part of my answer, how much you can accomplish if you're willing to just persist.
yeah. Now, do you relate persisting with suffering? Are these one and two of the same thing, or maybe different sides of the same coin? Or I don't know. Can you persist and do hard things without it necessarily getting to the level of suffering?
If you're undertaking big goals, I think you're going to suffer along that path. And I think that's why a lot of people will not assume they will not set big goals, or maybe they will, and then they will get partway into them. And if it looks like suffering is coming, then nah, I'm not really into that.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about the long treks and the mountaineering is you can get into places, and I was just on Monday in Telluride, where it's suffering. And I mean, you're suffering, but no one's coming to get you.
Yeah.
You got to get yourself out of there. And I've been there many times, and I've been with many colleagues who've been there many times in various states of suffering, and no one's coming to get you. I mean, just because you're super tired and sore and sweaty and dirty, and it's very hard, you can't call a helicopter to come get you out of there. You got to
Yeah.
do it yourself.
The only way out is through.
Bingo.
Yeah. And those are sometimes the scariest, but the most rich experiences. And one, as you were describing that, one similar example comes to my mind. I took my son at the time, I think he was 8 or 9, first time we'd ever been backpacking on Appalachian Trail. And the first night out, the wind's blowing, the tents all over the place, and it's dark. And he woke up in the middle of the night, scared to death. And all he was saying was, "I want to go home. I want to go home." I'm like, buddy, there is no going home right now, right? The only way we can get out of here is we get up tomorrow morning and keep walking. But 2 days later, we got done with the hike. He finished it as a 8 or 9 year old and could not wait to go back. And even
There you
now,
go.
he's 20 years old. He sees himself as a backpacker, right? I mean, he proved to himself that he did this scary thing and came out on the other side better for it. So, and I mentioned to you this before we started, but I still wonder, what is it about the human species that drives us to do that? Because I really do think that we don't generally do things unless there's a reward tied to it. And knowing that, I mean, like you just did this trip, you knew you were going somewhere hard that was going to be dirty, dangerous, there's going to be suffering involved, and yet you planned for months to do this, and spent probably a lot of time and money to make it happen. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we do those kind of things to ourselves?
I've been asked that, and I've struggled with the answer. One of my thoughts is, in the business world, you set goals, and you have strategies, you set goals, strategies to get you there. And in the business world, hour to hour, day to day, week to week, month to month, it doesn't feel like you're really making progress. And then you wake up 5 years later and you look back and say, wow, look what we've accomplished here. 5 years, 10 years, but it takes that kind of time. And day to day, it can be, you can just feel like you're not getting there. If I can look up at a mountain at a peak and say in a few hours or a few days, I'm going to be there, I get such a sense of accomplishment around that, because I accomplished a goal in a matter of hours or days. And it's very clear and very tangible. There it is. And then there's the challenge element. There's the, holy cow, look at that mountain. There's no way I can get up that thing. And then you put one foot in front of the other, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, and then you find yourself up there. And then the other thing I've learned on this in more recent years is the goal is not to get to the summit. The goal is to get back down, is the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And that's been another education piece for me that actually has come to me later in life, that the goal is not the summit. The goal is to get back down. So yeah, the doing hard things, I just find it so rewarding. I find it rewarding to stretch myself. It's also rewarding these trips like the Excellent Ventures. We get so much camaraderie. You're doing things with people who are like-minded and who are doing the same things and striving and struggling, doing the same things and setting the same goals. And there's great reward in that. And afterwards, sharing a meal and a beverage and stories is just a lot of fun. So I'm kind of rambling with my answer, and I don't know if I'm getting there or not, because I've never really been able to give a satisfactory answer to that.
I totally agree with all of those things that you just listed off. And those are things that I've, through my own experiences, I think make me want to go back and do these things and get into the middle of remote areas. A couple episodes ago that I released, I interviewed a mountain climbing guide, a guy named Matt Walker, who's also has a master's in psychology. And so the weaving
That's
of psychology and adventure, he was the first person I've come across that is able to do that. But he made the point, he actually has something to put out on the 5 components of adventure, the things like uncertainty and challenge, but the connection piece with other humans is a big part of it that actually make it really a true adventure and not just a selfish pursuit. And so it sounds like you've kind of gravitated to that in your life, and in any of these things that you've done. You've always had somebody else there with you, or is there any of them that you've actually done solo?
I do some things solo just in Colorado. We talked earlier about the 14ers, and I did them all, finished them 20 years ago, but I go back and do a couple a year anymore, as I say, just for fun and fitness. And I will usually do those alone just because I can't find someone else whose schedule matches up or whatever it is. So I'll do those alone, but that's a half day or a day kind of an outing. Most of the bigger stuff for sure I'll do with other people.
Yeah. Do you get the same, I don't know what the term is, same juice out of it when compared to when you're doing it with a group when you're solo, or is it a totally different experience?
I would say I don't get the same juice. You get the same juice of setting and achieving the goal, not to mention the good workout. But sharing life and success with other people is a huge part of it. And so yeah, you miss that component, but I don't mind at all doing that a handful of times a year, but it's not the same for sure, because you're not sharing the success, the striving and the success with other people.
Yeah, which I can easily see the overlap from that into business pursuits. You don't in the business world, especially in the financial advisory business, you generally don't do any of it alone. There's support at all different layers and levels. And so you're getting that illustration in the outdoors, which is pretty cool. Have any of these trips or things that you've done, when I say have any of them not gone according to plan or have kind of come off the rails, are there any that come to mind?
Oh gosh, how much time do we have? Yes, I mean, just in Telluride, when you have dozens of people out there and starting at different times and going different paces, and then you learn later that a couple people maybe got off on the wrong trail, and then weather was coming in, and so then they retreated down a different trail, and you don't know where they are or what happened to them for quite some time. That turned out fine, but there's the worry factor. I know you've talked on the podcast with and about Steve and breaking his leg on Mount Shasta and having a guide carry him out. Fortunately, that wasn't too far in, but that was certainly unexpected. Getting lost a couple times in Alaska on a long hike there. That was just when All Trails, the great app All Trails, was coming out, and it was still a little kind of shaky. And we got lost a couple times for a little while in Alaska. That was kind of unnerving, but we eventually got our way out of those. We were in the Grand Canyon one time, and I'll drop a big word on you that I learned from this Grand Canyon trip, but someone suffered from hyponatremia, which is drinking too much water without electrolytes. and completely bonked, completely ran out of energy. And that was a very difficult, got very sick. And that was a difficult one. Had a somewhat similar situation in Kauai on a hot day on the Nepali coast. So I have been lost plenty of times. Although since All Trails came out, that's a far less frequent occurrence.
That's nice.
I sort of hate to take all that technology into the backcountry, but that is an app that has steered me right many times.
When you get lost, what's the process that you mentally you go through? Is it, oh crap, what do we do? Or do you kind of have a mental checklist that you go through? Okay, now that I know we don't know where we're at, take me through what you do at that point.
I love the question. There's a great book, and I can't think of the name right now. Maybe it'll come to me before we finish here, but it's about that very question. And it's a book that lays out a different mishap in an adventure in every chapter. And
oh, wow.
Some people don't make it, and some people do. And the theme of the book is, why did these people make it out and these people didn't? And the author ties a thread through the whole thing that the people who make it are essentially the people who kept their heads and who said, hey, what can I control here and what can I not control here? And it's such a great read. When I finished it, I went out and bought a bunch of copies for my outdoor friends, and they all loved it. But
what's the title of it? Do you remember the title of it?
Maybe I'll search it here while we're talking.
Okay.
And I'm not in my home library right now. The time we took the Excellent Adventure group to Alaska was the first time my son came along, and he was in his 20s, and he didn't really do a lot in the outdoors at that time in his life. But he came along, we were late in the hike, and we got into this dense fog, and we lost the trail, and we were wandering around on this rocky slope looking for the trail. And at one point he looked at me, he said, I don't like this. And I said, I don't either, but we're gonna figure it out. And we ended up retracing our steps and finding the trail and getting out of there. So it's a lot of don't freak out. And I try to extend that into life. I've actually, in the last roughly decade, become a big fan of the Stoic philosophy.
Yeah.
About controlling what you can control.
Yeah.
And really understanding what you control and what you don't. And there's a really macro lesson for me, and something I love about this outdoor adventure is one thing I've learned over the decades is, out there, the only thing I control is myself. I don't control the terrain, the weather, other people, wildlife. I've had lots of wildlife encounters. I only control myself, and that's what I have to focus on. I got to focus on my preparation. I got to focus on my decision making. And when I get lost or something bad goes on, it's, look, let's keep our heads. What do we need to do here? What do we control? And let's focus on that.
Yeah. Is that going back to your dad's experience and what's in your DNA? Is that kind of level-headedness and calmness in the midst of a storm? Has that always been part of your character, or do you feel like that's again been developed as you've done more and more of these hard things?
I think it's been developed. In that case, it's been more developed over time.
Okay.
My dad was actually more of, I just looked up the book, Deep Survival.
All right.
It's worth the read. Deep Survival, Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why, by Lawrence Gonzalez.
Gosh, that's fascinating.
It really is fascinating. And one of the friends I gave the book to said, hey, one of those stories is about a friend of his who, I won't go into the whole story of what happened. He did make it out, but anyways, strongly recommend the book. But no, I think I learned that as I went through life. My dad was actually a little more, even though he was in the outdoors, he was a little more of a, if things go wrong, there might be some cursing or, but I don't know, there's something innate in me though, too, because I remember as a youth, if things would go wrong, my parents would look at me and say, why are you not freaking out right now? And I'd be kind of, I don't know. Is that what I'm supposed to do? Am I supposed to freak out?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to cry? Am I supposed to, I don't know. So somewhere in there's a gene, But whether has served me well in the outdoors, and I do think it has, it's also been very, very much enhanced and developed by all the time in the outdoors and really having it reinforced that the only thing you control out there is yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And in the sports world, they call those athletes, cold-blooded or slow heartbeat athlete.
Ice in their veins.
Yeah, yeah. Now,
Yeah.
did you play sports growing up? Was that?
I was a bad little leaguer.
Okay.
I did the usual at that time. It was all about baseball, football, and basketball, and I tried them all, and I was bad at all of them. And by 14, I was probably done with all of them. I was a scrawny kid growing up, and yeah, that didn't work for me. But I found my physical outlet later in life in the outdoors.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But I think that whether it's in sports or just in the outdoors and anywhere, there are people that I think are a bit more attuned to be a slower heartbeat in the midst of chaos. And it sounds like you maybe have that naturally a little bit, but there's still an element that you have. I think that has to be trained more and more. It's one of my previous guests on here, Robbie Linfesti. Long story short, with this guy, one of his adventures was he was kidnapped in the Patagonia outback in Argentina.
I think I heard about this story.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And he stole some horses and rode through the Patagonia for 2 days to find civilization and survive. That was one of the things that he had done. But he had this concept, and I'm pretty sure he didn't make this up, but he illustrated it with the comfort zone, the growth zone, and there's one or two others. But then you get to the death zone, right? If you stretch yourself too far, it's too much danger. But if we stay in the comfort zone, that's where like atrophy and decline and decay happen. And so this constant expanding of the comfort zone, or constant expanding into the growth zone, is what continues the growth personally and physically and any of those things. And I would say probably to your slow heartbeat, probably the more you have expanded into these different things, you've probably enhanced that ability to stay calm in the midst of chaos. So when I go in the backcountry, I want to go with you, because I don't know that I've quite developed that sense all the way. So,
well, I'm sure I haven't all the way, but it's an asset.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Telluride. So you just got back. From what Scott had mentioned to me, you guys were climbing over or around Mount Sneffels, but through some of there's a ultra marathon that's run through that area that is one of the most brutal in the world because of
Hard rock.
Yeah, the hard rock, because of the terrain. Some people call it the Switzerland of the Americas because of the steepness of some of the cliffs. And you just got back from there. So tell me a little bit about what you guys did.
Yeah, so just on Monday was our big hike. A few days before that, on Friday, I took a segment of the group. There were 9 of us, Mount Sneffels, which is what's called a class 3. Mountaineering has these classes to reflect the steepness and the trickiness of the terrain, whereas class 1 would be kind of walking down a hiking trail in the woods,
Okay.
and 2 might be more uphill, and 3 is you're starting to have to use your hands a little bit, and 4 is even steeper and more handwork, and 5, you better have a rope or you're not going to make it. So this is a class 3. So I picked it because it was in the neighborhood. We were going to Telluride anyways. I'd done this mountain a couple of times and loved it. It's just, as you say, the San Juans in Southwest Colorado are referred to as the Switzerland of America, or the Alps of America, whatever that term is, because the soaring peaks and the deep valleys, it's just incredible. And the Sneffels is just right in the middle of all of that. So it's a really, really special peak. And so 9 of us went up that. I knew some of us would be learning new skills.
Okay.
And not in the climbing gym, but
yeah.
But up there. But I also knew the guys I invited were up for that. And so we did that. You hike in a couple miles, and then you've got this steep gully you have to go up for maybe half a mile, 1,000 feet, some vertical, something like that, which is quite a strain. And then you have this it's called a V notch or something, where you climb up out of this gully onto the summit pyramid, and then it's kind of a short, steep hike from there. And we all made it up through there. You know, your prior guest, Scott McKillop, one of the things I admire so much about him, I don't think I'm giving this away. I think he mentioned his age on the podcast.
Oh, he did. Yeah, he talked a lot about that.
Yeah, he's 73, just recently turned 73. So I was kind of on the front end of this group with the son of one of our friends who's probably, I'm going to say 22 and super fit. He's a college athlete. He and I were up front, and we climbed up the gully, through the notch, onto the summit. And the others were in various, stages behind us. And I told Dante, is his kid's name, I said, I'm going to go back down to that notch and just make sure we guide our friends through that, because that's the real tricky part. And it's frankly pretty dangerous. So I went back down. It was only a couple hundred feet down to the notch. And I went down there, and there's this rock pillar at the top of the gully below the notch. And so I couldn't really see who was coming up until they were right there. And who is the next one up but my 73-year-old friend, Scott McKillop, at the top of that gully. And anyways, we all got to the top of that. The descent, frankly, on a steeper mountain like that is hairier than the ascent.
Yeah.
You're tired, and it's actually trickier to descend than ascend, especially when you're tired. But so we wanted to be really careful there, but we all got down and went into the town of Ouray in the middle of the San Juans there, and had a nice lunch, and went back, and then just did various things over the weekend. And then Monday we did the big hike with all the people. We did turned out to be about 26 miles and 8,000 vertical feet. We left right from our hotel. We try to plan it this way where we could leave right from our hotel in downtown Telluride at 3 a.m. in this case, headlamps ablaze.
Mm-hmm.
And we did do different groups at different times. Different people wanted to leave at different times and so on. But we had in my group of 18 people left at the hotel at 3 a.m. We just walked in Telluride a couple blocks, and you're on the hiking trail, walking along a creek, and then you start heading up into the mountains. The first stretch is 6 miles and a little over 4,000 feet up to the top of this pass. And then at that point, some people chose to turn and head back into Telluride, and others chose this really wickedly stupid spur off to the south to this little town of Ophir. It's almost a kind of an exurb of Telluride. So we skirted the ridge, and we dropped 4 miles and about 3,000 feet down into that town. And the hardest part of that whole thing is coming back up that 3,000 feet. Then you reverse course, you go 4 miles and 3,000 feet back up. You've already got 10 miles behind you and 4,000 vertical, and now you're adding 4 miles and 3,000 vertical. When we were down there, I was with my son and a friend, and I looked up and I said, guys, there's our trail back up to the top of the ridge. And my son looked up and he said, oh, gross. I guess the first thing to come out of his mouth, but that was one of those things you look up and you say, your instinct is sort of, that looks almost impossible.
Yeah.
And then you put one foot in front of the other, and 3 hours later, you're at the top of it again. And then we had a 11-mile trek back into Telluride from there. We took a mile detour up into this high lake that was really beautiful, and got back into Telluride. And one of the traditions we've developed over the years is either the hikers who finish ahead of others, or maybe spouses or families who are not hiking, will bring treats to the trailhead for the finishing hikers.
Little trail magic.
Little trail magic, it might be pizza or cookies or beer or what have you. That is just the best snacks and beer you've ever had in your life at that
Right. Everything tastes fantastic at that point.
Everything tastes fantastic at that point. And then we just walked back to the hotel and got showered up, and we have this celebration dinner at the end of the day. We had 40 of us out to dinner, and Chip and I, on the fly, we make up awards. Some are serious, some are funny. But we want to recognize people who really helped out others during the day, people who really showed up strong, people who had something really funny happen to them maybe, or did something funny, and we laugh and we have a great time, and then we announce the next year's trip and go off, and the next day everybody heads home. But
wow.
I went out to dinner with my daughter here in LA last night, and as we were sitting there, I got a text from a friend, and this is now, 3 or 4 days after the trip, and it was just something to the effect of, I'm still just basking in the joy of that trip, and so grateful to be part of the group. I get these for days afterwards, and people sharing pictures, and that's back to the camaraderie part of it. That is, we have people who once they come, sometimes they come once and you never see them again. And sometimes they come and they're locked in every year after that. And so there's a self-selection that goes on there.
Yeah.
And eventually you end up with this group of people that is so like-minded that we just love each other and being together. And we do this on the same weekend every year, the first weekend in August. So the core people know I'm blocking my calendar for that first weekend in August for a few days, because something great's going to happen.
Wow. So you guys stayed in downtown Telluride?
Yeah.
Did you go sit in the hot springs in Ouray while you were over there?
A couple people did. I did not make time for that, but Telluride's so great. It's such a great little mountain town, and it's got the one road in. It's not a through town.
Yep.
I was talking to the general
Box
manager.
Canyon.
Yeah, Box Canyon. I was talking to the general manager of the hotel as I was checking out, and he was asking me about our trip, and he said, Telluride's really not on the way to anywhere.
Yeah.
That's
You got to mean to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to Telluride because you're going to Telluride. It's not along the road anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. That folks listening to the podcast won't be able to see this, but this picture right here of my wife and I, it was actually taken at a kind of an overlook in Ridgeway, which is on the way in. And so those mountains that are behind us is probably Sneffels, or that whole range, looking into that area. But we spent time in Ouray, and this was in the summer. Now, you probably knew this, but Ouray, there's waterfalls that freeze over in the wintertime, and it's one of the greatest ice climbing areas in the world. I would not want to do that. I'm pretty sure that's not something that's on my list, but it's such a cool area.
It's a beautiful area. I tried ice climbing one time at the invitation of a friend who was accomplished in it, and it was enjoyable.
Really?
I haven't done it since, but yeah, you're in Ouray, to your point. I think they have some kind of world ice climbing championships on those falls every winter.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because Ouray's on one side of that range, and to get to Telluride, it's not like a tunnel through it. You got to go all the way around, and you're just I was kind of overwhelmed by the size of the mountains everywhere you looked, and then you get into Telluride, and you're literally surrounded everywhere. It makes sense why they built a town there, because somebody pulled in and go, all right, we're done. We're stopping right here.
Yeah, I'm sure it had to do with mining back in the mid 1800s probably. But yeah, you could get to that place and say, yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
To your point about getting from here to there, Mount Sneffels the trailhead is like 7 miles from downtown Telluride, and we drove 57 miles to get to it. You have to drive in this big sea all the way around those mountains to get to it. But they also have every year, you mentioned the ice climbing, there's a foot race from Ouray to Telluride over Imogene Pass. It's 17 miles. And Chip and I were there last year in the summer, the weekend they were doing that race, and there was all kinds of people in town. And I remember I was walking past this town park where all the finishers were, and they were doing the awards and things. And I just heard the loudspeaker as I was walking past, and they said, and now the winner of the 60s age category was whoever it was from Oklahoma in 4 hours. And this is a 17-mile rocky trail, 6,000 vertical foot descent foot race that this 60-something guy did in 4 hours. And I thought,
that's amazing.
There are amazing people in this. If I'm ever tempted to get full of myself for my outdoor accomplishments, all I got to do is hear something like that to put me in my place.
Yeah, there are people that do really crazy bonkers things. Another one of my guests did the Iditarod 1000 and actually won it. It's on the Iditarod Trail, 1,000 miles, foot race, fully self-supported,
So
in
you have to
February.
carry a pack.
Yeah. Well, he was pulling a sled.
The
He was
sled.
he was pulling a sled, not with dogs, with himself
Wow.
for 1,000 miles in February.
And how long does this take?
I think it took him, I don't remember, 2 or 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. Like, and that's part of what I take away from these conversations is I think I do hard things sometimes, and then I talk to these people and I'm like, no, I'm an amateur, which is fine. I do what I do, and I'm happy with that. But I love the kind of the canvas of what can be what I'm calling the everyday explorer. People that, aren't the full-time professional adventurer. They have other day jobs, but they still pursue these things in their life. And I think you've done a great job of illustrating how you have done that and what you get out of it. Well, and again, I love to figure out when we put the skis over that top, black diamond run, and you're looking straight down the side of the mountain going, I might die. I really might die here. And yet you still tip them down and drop into the bowl, and what do we gain from that? And I think you've done a really good job of describing how you've done that over and over again, and what you incrementally have gained over your lifetime from doing that. So where that leads me to kind of bring the train into the station a little bit is, with all that behind you, and I know you've got Zion planned, but what are some of the things that you're really looking forward to in this adventure space to still doing?
I get to a point in my life where it's, I did a 21,000-foot mountain in the Andes last fall, and I don't really aspire to go higher than that. I mean, I might if something piques my interest, but I don't have that goal. I've hiked 30 miles in a day before. I don't have a goal to do 35 or 40. It's just, I want to keep doing it. I want to keep pushing, keep doing hard things, keep exploring beautiful places with people I love. Just to go back to your last point, one of the guys who comes on these trips is Scott Hansen from Allworth, a really great guy and a good friend. And he has done the Western States 100 foot race, which is similar to the Hard Rock.
Yeah.
And he comes on these trips, and I don't think these are all that strenuous for him. But
Yeah.
he did say this last one in Telluride, he used the word brutal.
Okay.
So I took some pride in having picked that course that Scott Hansen called it brutal.
Well, there you go.
Back to your question, your more immediate question. I just want to keep doing these things. I want to, I love taking one international trip a year. I think I've got at least a couple more of those in me. Kind of eyeing right now a couple different things, either in Europe or South America, doing some different things there. I love your analogy of standing on top of the bowl with your ski tips in the air. I've been there a fair number of times, and there was a day early in my ski career, when I would probably have just backed up and gone down the blue run.
Yeah.
And then there was a day when I stood on top of that bowl with my ski tips in the air for 10 minutes thinking, what am I doing here, and how am I going to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to a point where I stood there and I just picked my route and went. And I personally call that growth. I mean, some people call it stupidity, or the fine line between stupidity and courage.
Yeah.
But it was like that V notch at the top of Sneffels the other day. I wasn't going to sit there at the bottom of it and psych myself out over it. It was pick your line, find your handholds, and go. And I think there's something in that for life too, is don't overanalyze. If you're committed to it, commit to it, have a plan, and go.
Yeah, that's good. That's really helpful for me as somebody that is I am the type that is ready, aim. Let's check that again and aim a little bit more. And
sometimes that's appropriate.
Well, and it is helpful at times, but there are times where I realize that it is getting in my way of doing the thing that I want to do, and I have to mentally stop it, right? Mentally just go and be willing to fail, be willing to figure it out. And I love that you've described how the outdoors has given you the opportunity to see that and develop that. So I think that's probably a good place for us to put a period on it. And so for anybody that wants to find out, do you put any information about these trips or journals, of the experience? Do you put any of that online that people can follow?
I think the best place to look for it would be at Chip's business website, which is tiburonadvisors.com.
Okay.
There's a tab there called, I think it's Excellent Adventures or something like that.
On their main site.
Yeah, on their site. And he's got
Okay.
all 13 of them chronicled, where were we, maybe a write-up on it. And then all the participants will upload their pictures to that site. So it's really cool. I mean, if you're interested in that kind of thing, that would be a good place to go, tiburonadvisors.com.
Gotcha.
And get a flavor for these trips, for the people who go on them. We have people who ask us throughout the years, we run into them, hey, that sounds really cool. How do I get invited? Well, we don't really invite people. If you want to go, tell us, and we'll put you on the mailing list, and you'll get the information. And if it's something that interests you, join us.
Do you have the route planned for Zion, or do you just have the place?
We have the route. And actually what we've done is, I mentioned earlier, we wanted to expand this and make sure people can be included who say, look, you guys are crazy for doing a 25 or 30 mile hike in the mountains. I'd love to come, but I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we will do is we'll lay out maybe 3 or 4 different hikes.
Okay.
And so we have a 29 mile and an 18 and a 10 and a 2. And of course you can do whatever you want too, but those are just 4 on the menu. We are going from Zion Lodge. The big one is going from Zion Lodge out to Goose, I think it's called Goose Knoll. So it's an out and back, about 14 miles each way, 5,000 or 6,000 vertical. But the Narrows would be one option. That's about a 15 miler, a really epic, famous hike. I haven't done
I've heard about that one.
Angel's Landing is down there. That's 5 or 6 miles round trip, and a little different element there, permitted climb.
Yeah.
So there's a ton to do in the area. So I think there's something for everybody who really is into being outside.
That's cool. Very cool. Well, Skip, I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I'm really glad we connected. And so maybe a year from now, we redo it and talk about everything that happened in Zion. So that'd be pretty cool.
I would love it, and I hope we don't have any bad stories to tell.
Yes.
But stuff can happen, and love the podcast, and thanks for having me on.
All right.
Okay. Man, I really enjoyed that. I hope you did as well. The next one will be coming at you in a couple weeks, so stay tuned. Until then, I hope you have your own great adventure.